The walls were shaking for Russians. More than 200 drones attacked Russia. A military airfield in Engels was attacked. Strategic bombers that attack Ukraine have been damaged, as well as depots with FAB, KAB, and cruise missiles. Moreover, it is reported that Kh-555 and Kh-101 missiles for the Tu-95 and Tu-160 have been damaged. In Kuban, Russia, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost 2 days now after a drone attack. The GUR has successfully attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, naval vessels, and a helicopter came under attack. 13 Russian radar stations were hit. And in Russia, they are claiming that the armed forces of Ukraine attempted to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? We will discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. Wishing everyone good health.
Dear audience, please like this video. Write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, how many bombers were damaged? Because according to the information I have, as I understand it, there were several bombers there and one IL which delivered the missiles. Here's what they write. In the morning, an IL-76 arrived at the base, likely delivering a new batch of Kh-101 missiles. And at Engels, there were 3 Tu-95MS and 2 Tu-160S. What do you think?
Well, they were definitely damaged. The question is, to what extent? Why? Because there was a large-scale attack, and the attack was carried out by drones, most likely by a missile. So, bada boom, since it was a bada boom, then the fifth element that broke through the roof, if anyone remembers that movie, was most likely one of our missiles. I wouldn't even rule out the possibility of a long-range Neptune being used in that direction, and naturally the detonation that happened after the strike, the detonation of missiles, aerial bombs, and small arms ammunition, the small arms that are loaded onto the planes, among other things. Naturally, the planes parked nearby couldn't have avoided being damaged. The question is, to what extent were they damaged? I think that within a few days, our intelligence, our general staff will confirm this after analyzing satellite images and decoding them, that is, using objective monitoring tools. And then we'll be able to celebrate once again, maybe in the next stream, we'll be able to confirm this clearly together.
Roman Grigorievich, so what could have been hit? So the bombers themselves, the cruise missile storage, and the aviation fuel depot. So these were the targets of the armed forces of Ukraine. Our missiles and our drones.
Any strategic bomber base is, to put it simply, like a large city. In addition to the airfield itself, a huge number of infrastructure facilities of various types are involved in its operation. These range from underground fuel storage tanks holding tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene to various depots, including, most importantly, the Special Engineering Service for Missile Preparation, and of course, storage for aviation bombs and missiles used by these strategic bombers. By the way, not many people talk about this, but several dozen kilometers south of Engels, along the left bank of the Volga, there is another facility known as Saratov 63. This is a nuclear storage site, or more precisely, a storage facility for nuclear warheads intended for strategic and tactical aviation. In other words, there are significant stockpiles of the 12th Main Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation stored there, specifically tactical nuclear weapons. Just a few dozen kilometers away, and the mushroom cloud wouldn't be like the one over Engels. It would be a massive one reaching all the way to Kazakhstan. The Kazakhs would have seen it already. It's a shame, really. I have too many friends in Kazakhstan, so of course I'd hate to disappoint them like that. But still. So this is a really serious facility, and to take it out, not just with missiles or drones, to level it completely, you'd need several squadrons of bombers carpet bombing the place. But if you blow up this underground fuel storage, let me repeat, we're talking about tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene used by strategic bombers. A single bomber like the Tu-160 takes on board the equivalent of 3 railway tank cars of this kerosene. More than 150 tons of aviation kerosene are loaded into it. Then for the Tu-95, it's 1 tank car, which is still quite a lot. So there are definitely worthwhile targets there. If a strike were to hit all of these facilities, the consequences for the Russians could be catastrophic. By the way, it was to Engels that we once handed over our 2 aircraft, both the Tu-160s and Tu-95s, Tu-22s, and our Kh-55s. Back then, hundreds of missiles were given up by Kuchma. It was Kuchma who was in charge of all that, at least at the time. And now Basically, we're going to try to destroy the very same strategic bombers that we once handed over to the Russians. As for what exactly was hit, we'll know for sure in a few days once the satellite images have been analyzed.
Roman Grigorievich, how many military personnel are usually stationed at such air bases at military airfields?
Well, the thing is, they perform different tasks and the area varies, but there should be at least a regiment stationed there, that's for sure. About 1,500 Russian federal troops should be involved in this process. 1,500 to 2,000.
Could we have eliminated enemy personnel with these strikes, Roman Grigorievich?
Absolutely, 100%. The thing is, even with this engineering and technical service, the special engineering service, naturally there's security, defense of the facility itself, storage of the missiles. Missiles aren't stored like matches. There are even certain climate control mechanisms, especially for missiles of this kind. So several dozen people were definitely taken out there, and the remaining hundreds they definitely cleared out after that strike. Believe me, the shockwave there was serious.
Roman Grigorievich, right now the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost a whole day after the drone attack. And everyone is talking about the long-range Neptune, the modified missile. Let's discuss this missile as well as the strikes on oil refineries and depots. Regarding Kavkazskaya, which has been burning for almost 2 days now.
Malyuk and Budanov's sanctions have now become the sanctions of Ukraine's defense forces. Why? Because in such strikes, like the one on Engels, the security service of Ukraine and special operations forces were naturally involved. So at the very least, and probably also the naval fleet, if a Neptune was involved, then a coastal missile system and a launch platform were used at least. But I think within a day, this will become clear. Long Neptune, long is the same story. That is, it's launched from a coastal missile system. Naturally, the Navy is involved in this. The main targets for this type of missile are objects that need to be penetrated. For example, after all, a 150-kilogram warhead is not the same as a drone's 20 kilograms or 50 or however much they carry. And so a 150-kilogram warhead can reach the target and detonate. As we can see now, presumably, let's say for now, presumably a warehouse with missiles and aerial bombs was blown up in Engels. Well, naturally, the same type of warhead could be used against TUAPs, for example, or to breach the detonation system at pumping stations. This is one of our main objectives right now. God forbid it gets stopped. Right now, all these representatives, not from our government, are running around with the idea of how to secure Russia's hydrocarbon infrastructure. So, God forbid these strikes are stopped like they were last year. If Budanov's sanctions hadn't been stopped last May, there wouldn't be any this year because there would be nothing left to destroy. We would have squeezed everything out last year. Now it turns out they're trying to stop these strikes. The missile is very good. It's our basic Neptune missile, or long, or Neptune is the basic missile, also known as the KH-35. At one time, it was also produced at our facility. Our engines for this missile are turbojet engines. The missile is a dual circuit one designed for air-to-ship missions. That's its main purpose. In other words, it's an anti-ship system. The missile was later upgraded to be able to strike ground targets, and with a good engine and additional fuel tanks, it can now travel over 500 kilometers. For example, it reached at least as far as TUAPs, which is 500 kilometers away. I think it could have also been used against Engels because they managed to hit a warehouse that was practically sealed off. Well, these missiles aren't just lying around outside. In other words, it's secured. If it was breached, then most likely a missile got in. But there is no confirmation yet. So for now, we won't confirm it either. This is just an analytical note.
Roman Grigorievich, just to clarify for our audience, what is the range of this missile? And what new possibilities does this open up for us? Let's make sure we establish that now.
Well, the missile's range, at least the confirmed one, is 500 to 600 kilometers, that's for sure. We saw this with Tuapse and maybe now with Engels as well. There it's a little over 600 kilometers. That's the actual stated range. So what does 500 to 600 kilometers mean? It's like a semicircle from Moscow through Engels to Tuapse. If you draw that circle, that's the entire area we can reliably hit with this missile. But the stated range is 1,000 kilometers. You could, for example, put a compass in St. Petersburg and draw a semicircle almost all the way to the Caucasus. So that would already cover areas closer to Kazakhstan. To the east, it would reach beyond the Volga, at least past Engels and Astrakhan, closer to Kazakhstan. And to the south, this missile would reach the North Caucasus if the stated range matches the actual flight range. Technically, it's possible. Basically, the engine is very good. Our engine, which we manufacture, will definitely run for an hour. and the missile speed is 850 kilometers per hour. But running for an hour or an hour and a half is not a problem. The main thing is the fuel. That is, it depends on how many extra buckets you fill into the missile. That's how far it will fly, depending on the range.
So, does that mean Moscow, St. Petersburg, and military infrastructure targets could be attacked?
Well, definitely they're already under serious targeting. And in order for us to fully carry out our tasks of securing our border, we need to reach about 2,000 kilometers. Roughly speaking, we need to reach as far as the Urals. It's 2,000 kilometers to the Urals. But as for cruise missiles, it's probably not really worth it to make cruise missiles with such a range right now. Ideally, of course, either drones, which are a bit cheaper, or ballistic missiles. So for this kind of range, either solid fuel or liquid fuel, in other words, ballistic missiles. I think if we don't solve this issue this year, then we'll do it next year.
More good news, the main intelligence directorate successfully attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea under air defense strikes. The targets under attack included naval vessels and a helicopter. 13 Russian radar stations were hit, including one L-125 Niobiy-SV, Nebo-SV, and the MICE Barles. How do you assess the work of the main intelligence directorate? As I understand it, all of this was done over a certain period of time, and it has now been documented.
This definitely took several months. This is the work of the GUAR's Bex Magur, the main directorate of intelligence and the security service, their own Bex, practically from unmanned boats, they turned them into aircraft carriers. Both of them did it. Both the GUAR's Magura and the SBU's Sibep. They can now operate almost like an aircraft carrier, carrying unmanned aerial vehicles. Moreover, they can carry UAVs, and they can also carry unmanned vehicles, both surface and underwater, meaning they can function as a mothership and a relay station at the same time. Here is a boat several meters long and of a certain width, which is capable of taking unmanned aerial vehicles on board, for example, and approach the coast of Crimea or some other Russian area. Territories closer to Novorossiysk and just a few kilometers from the shore. They can launch drones under direct control using the boat itself as a relay station. The guys can carry out a combat mission just as they do directly with, say, those same FPV drones. That is a certain type of drone. The UAV takes off and then destroys a Russian radar system. It destroys an anti-aircraft missile system or some other military target, depending on the capabilities. Plus, especially the GUAR's Magura drones can also carry sea-to-air missiles depending on the launch configuration. This is the R-73 air-to-air missile. It's an excellent missile. It's already half a century old. Thousands of them have been produced, and we have those thousands. It has a heat-seeking homing head, so if you aim it correctly, if the missile locks on, it will catch up with the target. And if there are two missiles on the Maguras, two missiles, then that also means the destruction of aerial targets. Here is confirmation of a helicopter being destroyed. In fact, definitely more than one. One was completely destroyed and the second was seriously damaged. So in this sense, the GUAR operators have practically become naval aviators, I would say. In other words, the GUR has entered a field that isn't typical for them and has performed quite well there. And the security service under Maliuk, so the GUR under Budanov's command and the SBU under Maliuk's command, they practically cover the entire spectrum now. At present, they are using all kinds of strike systems, and what's more, they produce them at their own facilities, which is very important. These are intelligence agencies operating from their own bases at their own expense. After all, their budgets are quite small. These are not the armed forces of Ukraine, not those enormous billion or even 100 billion budgets. Still, they manage to find sponsors on their own, most likely, and perhaps even accomplish these kinds of tasks. Well, good for them. There's nothing more to say. Tamar.
Nikolaevich, before we talk with you about the Belgorod region and the information from Russian war correspondents, I would like you to give a brief overview, a primer on the Ukrainian Grom-2 missile system. What are its potential capabilities and how should these capabilities be used? Please, the floor is yours.
To understand the process, what is the Grom-2? It's essentially the same as the Iskander. In terms of range, warhead, and control system, it's just like the Iskander. We have one too. Several decades ago, a good project was launched called Sapsan. Based on this Sapsan, a solid fuel system was developed specifically for the Grom missiles, ballistic missiles, and naturally, the project yielded results. That is, work was carried out on this project, Grom-1 and Grom-2. Now we have achieved a range of 300 kilometers. We built it and sold it along with an audit using Saudi money, by the way, and even sold it together with the technical documentation. But most likely, the intervention of our partners allowed us to at least get the technical documentation back, maybe some launchers, maybe even some missiles as well. I wouldn't rule that out. So what is Gram 2? It's basically the same as the Iskander, 500 kilometers, Moscow 2-ups. That's those 500 kilometers. So if there are enough ballistic missiles, then Rubliovka, remember we once talked about this, we said it would be better for the Rubliovka elite to get as far away as possible from those bathhouses where the main decisions for further military actions in Russia are made.
Why? Because the first Grom should definitely bury Lenin. How much longer does he have to lie there after all? The Kremlin is the first target and the second is Rubliovka, or on the contrary, depending on preference. Maybe Rubliovka will actually be the first to go. Roman Nikolaevich, now of course this information which has been circulating for several days in Russian propaganda channels and among Russian war correspondents is being discussed because Russia is claiming that the armed forces of Ukraine are attempting to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? Let's analyze it.
Well, to understand the situation, we have about 600 kilometers of border, if you do not count the curves, just the straight border between Belarus. And the fragment is between Ukraine and Russia. On our side, that's the Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions. Yes, that fragment. On the Russian side, that's the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. So for us, the main task is to turn this borderline into a front line, because that's the right and smart thing to do, to change the architecture of the front, to open the northern front. It has already been opened after we started moving into the Kursk region. The Kursk direction toward Moscow is called that only by complete idiots. As part of the main task of tying down enemy forces, several tens of thousands of Russian soldiers were pinned down there. And naturally, the creation of the so-called security zone or buffer zone, it can be called differently, a support zone if it's a front line and a mine strip, about 30 kilometers. We need to create such a security zone deep inside Russian territory, a demilitarized one, but the Russians denazify it. They immediately start bombarding it with aerial bombs and artillery and evacuate the civilian population from there. So such a buffer zone can be created not even by advancing 30 kilometers. You can go in 3, 5, or 7 kilometers, but onto Russian territory and mine not our land, but Russian territory. Lay down several 100,000 of these mines. That way they'll be digging them out for 100 years if they even want to at all. And naturally, army artillery can add another 25 kilometers to the creation of such a buffer zone beyond the initial 30 kilometers. In the Kursk direction, we did it, we accomplished it. The only retreat, we've already talked about this, the withdrawal was almost catastrophic because it was untimely. The decision was made to withdraw and redeploy into defensive positions. This is exactly what we're doing now in the Belgorod region. It's the same kind of operation, just not as deep, without an operational breakthrough. It's a tactical operation involving an incursion and the creation of such a buffer zone on Belgorod territory, taking up the best defensive positions. The thing is, there's a difference in elevation. This is the so-called central Russian upland. The difference in height is 50 to 70 meters. And between, well, just so you understand, between the hills, yes. So the rivers, or rather the small streams that are there, the little creeks, they're at about 140 meters above sea level, while the tops of these uplands are around 220 to 230 meters. So these elevation differences, it's best to take control of the high ground, no matter where they are, whether on our side or the Russian side. If there's an opportunity to enter Russian territory to improve defensive positions, that's the task that's carried out. Right now in the area of Demidovka, a mission is being carried out in the Belgorod direction. Well, the first issue is, of course, creating this kind of buffer zone. And the second is to try to intercept Russian reserves that are now being freed up from the Kursk direction. As we withdraw along the borderline, they will be redeployed to the Eastern Front so that they don't end up on the Pokrovsk direction where they have about 2 divisions maybe. That's practically 30,000 Russian troops who could now be transferred from the Kursk direction to the Eastern Front. They'll be passing by right around there, along, or rather through the Belgorod region. And in order to intercept them, I think that's why such pressure is now being created in the Belgorod region. There's a positive trend at the moment, at least for now. Of course, we can't discuss tactical matters. Even if we knew them, it's not allowed to broadcast tactical information. But in reality, I think in a week we'll be able to talk about the results of this tactical operation.
The Russians claim to have allegedly shot down an F-16 over Skoptura in the Sumy region. The Air Force has already debunked this fake news. So what impact will that have? Andriy Demchenko, the Russians are storming the Sumy region border on ATVs. New Su aircraft are destroying their groups. What do you say, Roman Hryhorovich?
They got scared by the information that came out a few days ago. There was a really good video showing the use of F-16S over Sumy. Naturally, Russian information operations. In another way, actually, from a logical and operational standpoint, they responded correctly. We should also take note of this. Our own information and psychological operations teams should learn from this example too. After all, FSB and KGB officers, they've been conducting these psychological special operations for 100 years. They had to carry out such an information operation because it really rattled the Russians. The appearance of the F-16 practically at the line of contact. Combat missions were carried out at extremely low altitudes, most likely involving the dropping of certain munitions. Below the radar horizon of Russian air defenses, naturally, no one could reach it. And this really hit the Russians in that direction. Naturally, they needed to counter this information, so they came up with another information operation claiming they shot down an F-16 in that direction. And believe me, no one shot anything down. I have friends, quite a few friends, who, if anything had happened, would have shared the information. I can say with confidence, no one shot anything down. The guys are working along the entire line of contact on F-16s and Mirages. They have already gone out on combat missions, carrying out tasks in those directions where it's possible, based on the density of the enemy's air defenses and our own ability to cover these aircraft. God's due. So first, fill in the blanks yourself so I don't have to swear too much. So this so-called God's due in Trump's eyes, which was organized by Putin. For what purpose? Well, in order to create a certain amount of pressure. The Ukrainian side, it's the same IPSO, an information psychological special operation in which the top officials of the state are involved. This is a serious operation. For what purpose? In order to give the Russian population mainly, and of course Trump, and to try it out on Ukraine, a chance to suppress, to paint some other picture of the real events happening on Kursk soil. We are holding the Kursk region. No one is encircled there. We are holding on. And the retreat, yes, there was a retreat, indeed, a belated flight. If a month and a half ago, as we said, there had been an organized withdrawal, then it would have been a controlled move to defensive lines. It was a flight, but still to defensive lines located on Russian territory. The difference is that the Sudzha River, Kursk, well, along the Kurshina, which runs there, the Perepluyka stream, but its elevation above sea level is 140 meters. Nearby, to the south, the elevation is already about 220 meters. So here there's at least a 50 to 70 meter elevation difference, and this is Kursk land. And on these heights, our units that withdrew from the Sudzha direction have taken up positions. And as for retreating further, at the moment, no one intends to do so. Naturally, the Russians need to show that they're surrounded there, that everything is lost there. Boss, the client is leaving, the cast is coming off, everything's lost, and so on. They're trying to cut us off, but it's a long way from an encirclement. It's just unrealistic because along the borderline, there are these ridges. That's how it's set up. And of course, our troops are present there. On Kursk land, I don't think we'll be leaving from there. There's a good defensive line there. And the Russians, who are trying to cut off our direction, are stuck in the Basovka area. So yes, that's the Sumy region, Sumy territory. It's just a few kilometers from the borderline. That's all it is. They're trying to somehow break through, to cut off the supply to this group, but in the information space to somehow ramp up the pressure while Putin threw in, let's put it gently, some nonsense, threw it at Trump, and now Trump is just mirroring it. What else can he do? Right now, he's tied to Putin, to his non-involvement in that adventure they started together with Netanyahu in the Middle East. Once again, strikes are being carried out against the Houthis in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, in Syria. Naturally, if the Russians decide to make their weighty statement there, it won't end well for anyone, and most likely strikes against Iran are still ahead. In the Middle East, where Trump has been dragged in, and now he has nowhere to go. Well, Witkoff got him involved, and after all, he's such a great Israeli-American or American-Israeli. That's why Russian oil refineries of all kinds and at all levels will continue to burn. Maybe not with the same intensity, and it might be presented a bit differently. Not, for example, as sanctions or actions by the Ukrainian Defense Forces, but as the work of the local underground at various levels. I think that, by the way, this kind of work by our informants could be just as effective as it is now. The Ukrainian Defense Forces. Believe me, tens of millions of Ukrainians are definitely fighting for their land, for their sovereignty, for their territorial integrity. They won't stop, and you can't turn around several million residents of Donetsk, Luhansk, or Crimea.
Dear audience, please like this video and leave a comment. Write a few kind words in support of the armed forces of Ukraine and share your thoughts about this situation as a whole. Renowned analyst Roman Svitan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and as always, see you next week.
Goodbye.